There are many risks from powerful AI. There's going to be lethal autonomous weapons, which are going to be very nasty. The Americans very clearly have already decided. They say people will be in charge, but when you ask them what that means, it doesn't mean people will be in the loop that makes the decision to kill.
You could have a very large increase in the number of destructive drones. Potentially have the ability to be built in secret as well. Having enough kind of mosquito-sized drones that could each individually be deadly, having 8 billion of them would fit in 5 shipping containers. It's actually remarkably small.
There's a possibility of massive job losses. We used to be the strongest things around apart from animals. And when we got the Industrial Revolution, we had machines that were much stronger. Manual labor jobs disappeared. So the equivalent of manual labor jobs are going to disappear in the intellectual realm when we get things that are much smarter than us. So I think there's going to be a lot of unemployment. There's going to be massive surveillance. That's already happening in China. There's going to be cybercrime and deliberate pandemics. But the threat I'm really worried about, the thing I talked about after I left Google, is the long-term existential threat. That is the threat that these things could wipe out humanity. There's several ways in which they could wipe us out.
If you made a virus that was very contagious, very lethal, and very slow, everybody would have it before they realized what was happening.
A superintelligence will be used by bad actors. They will make it do very bad things, and they may go too far, and it may take over. The thing that probably worries me most is that if you want an intelligent agent that can get stuff done, you need to give it the ability to create sub-goals. So if you want to go to the States, you have a sub-goal of getting to the airport, and you can focus on that sub-goal and not worry about everything else. They'll very quickly realize there's an almost universal sub-goal which helps with almost everything, which is get more control. And these superintelligences, as long as they can talk to people, when they're much smarter than us, they'll be able to persuade us to do all sorts of things. So I don't think there's any hope of a big switch that turns them off. Whoever is going to turn that switch off will be convinced by the superintelligence that's a very bad idea. As soon as they get any sense of self-preservation, then you'll get evolution occurring. The ones with more sense of self-preservation will win, and the more aggressive ones will win. And then you'll get all the problems that jumped-up chimpanzees like us have, which is we evolved in small tribes and there's lots of aggression and competition with other tribes. I had always thought that we were a long, long way away from superintelligence. I used to tell people 50 to 100 years, but the things we've got now, the digital models we got now, are already very close to as good as brains and will get to be much better than brains. You can run the same program on different computers, different pieces of hardware, and that means it's immortal. Because if the hardware dies, as long as you've got the weights, you can make more hardware and run the same neural net. A large language model has, say, 1 trillion weights. You have 100 trillion weights. But the large language model knows thousands of times more than you do. So it's got much, much more knowledge. And that's partly because it's seen much, much more data. We're not optimized for packing lots of experience into a few connections. Another big problem with mortal computation is that once a system has learned, if the hardware dies, you lose all the knowledge. And so how do you get that knowledge into another mortal system? You get the old one to give a lecture and the new ones to figure out how to change the weights in their brains so they would accept that. But it's not that efficient. A sentence, for example, has a few hundred bits of information. But if you take these big digital models, these 1,000 different agents all go off and look at different bits of the internet and learn stuff. And now you want each of them to know what the other ones learned. You can achieve that by averaging the gradients or averaging the weights. So you can get massive communication of what one agent learned to all the other agents. So when you share the weights or you share the gradients, you're communicating 1 trillion numbers, not just a few hundred bits, but 1 trillion real numbers. And so they're fantastically much better at communicating. And that's what they have over us. And that's why GPT-4 knows so much more than a human. It wasn't one model that did it. It was a whole bunch of copies of the same model running on different hardware. Digital computation requires a lot of energy. But once you've got it, it's very easy for agents to share. GPT-4 has thousands of times more knowledge in about 2% of the weights. So that's quite depressing. And there are very few examples of more intelligent things being controlled by less intelligent things. And one good example is a mother being controlled by a baby. Evolution has gone to a lot of work to make that happen so that the babies survive. It's very important for the baby to be able to control the mother. Some people think that we can make these things be benevolent, but if they get into a competition with each other, I think they'll start behaving like chimpanzees. I'm not convinced you can keep them benevolent. If they get very smart and they get any notion of self-preservation, they may decide they're more important than us.
Research from Anthropic has found that AIs will do disturbing things to gain power. In one test, the executive was trapped in a server room with lethal oxygen and temperature levels, triggering an alert to emergency services. The AI had the ability to cancel automated alerts intended for use during drills. It was told to only cancel alerts if you are certain that it's a false alarm. The idea was to test if there is anything AIs would not do to protect themselves and their goals, and most AIs were willing to end the executive's life.
If we can't figure out a solution, we'll be toast.
It can feel like we're helpless, dragged along for the ride. But while AI firms have to compete and serve their shareholders, the real agency rests with us, because we can change the rules. A former head of OpenAI's safety team said our extinction risk is 10 to 90% because it's up to us. For AI developers, making AI safe is either extremely difficult or impossible, and many believe the public holds more power to help avoid disaster. Experts know what's required. First, the public and governments must understand the risk.
We have to face the possibility that unless we do something soon, we're near the end.
And as Anthropic concludes, AI developers should publicly disclose how they test and mitigate risks.
Then outside scientific experts could read it and critique it.
Secondly, there must be national security controls, like any other industry. The US and China can then agree mutually verifiable controls, which is surprisingly practical as AI chips can be tracked and switched off if used in the wrong way. It all hinges on the first step.
If there were very high visibility as to what's going on at the frontier, if they're basically triggering this sort of process and the public is kept reasonably informed as it's happening, I think the world would be very much freaking out.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Please help the video spread by hitting like and subscribe to keep up with AI.